Good morning and welcome to the Morning Coffee Show. I'm Prince Hakeem.
Amanda Love.
And today we have a very controversial topic. I think it's something that people will argue about on one end, saying that yes, and other people say no. But we're going to talk about it today, and it's about kids and sexual orientation. Is it something that is imposed on them, or is it something that they're choosing to do on their own? I believe that we as a society are doing a lot more imposing these thoughts and ideals in kids nowadays. Is it a bad thing? I think when you make people aware of something, then it gives them an option. I don't think options are bad, but when I feel like it's an agenda behind it, that's where I start to question a little bit more, like what's really happening? What do you think?
So, just to kind of summarize what you said, so I make sure my understanding is right before I start arguing.
Okay.
So you think people turn out to be gay because there's some sort of imposing, or it has something to do with society and an impression that they're left with?
Yes.
Okay. I disagree.
Okay, that's fine.
I think that's part of it sometimes, but I don't think that's solely, because you hear a lot of kids, you do hear a lot of, and I'll just say people in general that are gay, bisexual, whatever they are, that say, no, I was born this way.
Mm-hmm.
Or for as long as I can remember, I've always been this way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been a big question in terms of research and psychology, counseling. That's been a huge question for a long time, in terms of just research and identifying, like back in the day, you've heard people say like they were researching a gay gene to see if like people could really be born gay, like if there's just a little gay gene inside your body and, and there isn't necessarily a gay gene, that has never been proven.
Right.
But biologically, there is specific things in our genome makeup, in our DNA, that creates the likelihood of being gay or having bisexual or whatever, a different sexual orientation than just heterosexual. There are precursors to that you would say like make a person more likely to be.
I didn't look into that piece of research. Okay.
You know I did.
I know you did, but I gotta read up on it. Yes, next week. What I'm saying is, I understand that there are men and women have very similar genetic makeup. Because at some point, while in the womb, you could be either become a man or woman, or male or female. Like it's legitimately like a split second of how nature decides what we want to be, right? So I do believe we're all born with some of the feminine and masculine traits, right? I think when you start to identify, and you understand what we're saying, the identification of something. I identify with something, that means I seen something that I identify with.
So you're talking about the action.
So yeah, once you say, hey, and by no means, I want people to understand, I'm not gay bashing. I love gay people. I think gay people are cool. And you love who you want to love. The thing that confuses me is about the children that are being, I feel like it's being imposed on them. Let them be kids. Nobody cares about the sexual orientation portion of it, because it's no way a 5-year-old know that they're gay. It's not possible unless somebody showed them and told them that. Because at 5, they don't even know if they don't know if they like G.I. Joes. Like they don't know. And so until somebody say, hey, this is something that you should be paying attention to. This is an idea. Like at 5, unless they're told or shown, they don't even know who God is. So let alone saying I'm this or that, I'm straight, I'm gay, I'm, whatever letter in the alphabet game they got. And I'm not, taking any jazz, but it's exactly that. We are starting so young, and we were talking prior to the show. I watched a few shows with my son. He's 10. I know some of the shows is geared for kids. There's a lot of gay references in there, and it's subtle. And I'm like, as a parent, I don't know what don't know how to take that because I'm not pressuring him on one end or the other. I'm not saying you're gonna get a girlfriend today. You're gonna have this. I don't do that to my son. He's 10. You know what I'm saying? He'll come to me and let me know if he likes little girls or whatever. He's already came to me like, yeah, he had a crush on this girl or whatever. But I didn't go and make him feel like he needed to have a girlfriend. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I think when you are presenting things where, like, oh, that's something, that's a something, allow them to grow into that and ask questions on their own, and then nurture that part of it. But when I feel like you're imposing something on someone, if you see something enough, hear something enough, and it becomes part of a trend, and I'm not saying being gay is a trend, but they're starting to make it look that way. That's what I'm talking about.
Well, it's hard because it's like when somebody says, like, if you see something, nurture that, right? It's like when you think about the big picture of things when it comes to children, people, like, if you think about people with clothes, right? A lot of people will say, oh, if you go into like Walmart or Kmart or whatever you go to, Target, and you look at like the girls' clothing section and boys' clothing section, they have way more stuff in the girls' clothing section. And girls' clothes are cool, right? They have sequins, they have, you know, different colors, brighter colors, they have more of a variety, they're more eye-catching. And when kids are small, and I'm talking like toddlers, babies, you know, like 5, 6, that's what stimulates children when they're young. Like if we're going back to like brain chemistry, right? What catches a child's attention immediately is gonna be things like colors, stimulation, sensory things that they can touch. Like, this has a cool texture, I really like that, so I'm gonna naturally gravitate towards that, and I wanna see it, and I wanna touch it, and I wanna feel it. And girls they're more likely to have those things involved in like their wardrobe or their toys or whatever. They're like brighter colors, they're more eye-catching colors. So boys tend to like look at like, how many times have you seen a boy look at a girl's toy or something like that, and their father be like, you don't play with dolls. Yeah. You don't do this. You know, and the boy is like deterred and told like, don't do that. So what you're saying, I hear it, but I don't wholeheartedly agree that that's how people see it, because they'll say like, nurture what's there, but you're not really nurturing what's there, because naturally there are a lot of boys that gravitate towards girl things, and they're told like, no, you can't play with that because that's not a boy's toy, and vice versa, you know. And then you've made it a thing by doing that, because now it's, why not? Because they don't know the difference. Like you said, they don't have a preference or an understanding of what that means or where that comes from. So they don't know. And I believe that we're all kind of born, when it comes to our preference, like gender neutral, right? Because when you're a kid, I don't know the difference between like, I like boys or girls. How many kids have you heard like really young and you say liking them and they're like, ugh, I don't like him, until you start to get older. Right. So that is, all of it is us imposing an impression of something. Right.
Let me ask you a question. You like that, right? You find yourself being heterosexual, right?
Yes.
At what point and what made you feel that, hey, I like men, I don't like girls? Is it a young age?
Oh yeah.
But why? What was the driving force to say? And I can tell you exactly what, for me as a man, like what drew me to women. But what would say you had an option? You could have did either one. What stopped and said, hey, I like boys? Something had to happen. You had to see here. Something had to happen to say boys is where I'm headed to. And that's what I'm into. That's it, right? Do you know what that was for you?
I'm gonna say I am typical in the sense of scientifically. And I know we've talked about it before, so you've heard it before. It's like a father is a girl's first boyfriend in terms of how she identifies men. My father, when I was a child, my father was handsome, always clean, always smelled good. He worked every day. So he was a man, like a man. And I think because he was that, my grandmother never worked, so he was the provider. When I was looking at pictures of him older, like I could see like his dress was always like a suit, a tie, because back then that's what that was. Like women were very feminine. We're talking about late 1800s, early 1900s. Women were very feminine, men were men. They were wearing ties and whatever. So I think I was raised in a family where the gender roles were very identified, like clear cut. And we were raised Catholic. So even if you were gay, if you felt an attraction, you were not acting on that attraction. It wasn't even a thought, because to you were like, I'm going straight to hell. Like, that's just how you were raised and how you were taught. But I do remember being a kid in Catholic school and hearing girls and boys talk about liking the same sex. And it was just something that it was very like just something you didn't do.
Right. So you identified with something, right? So you identified,
like I found my father
as your thing. So what I'm getting at, once again, is something that you saw that drew you into, that's what I'm supposed to be, that's what I'm supposed to like. And this is the basis of what I'm saying. For kids being impressionable, are we doing a little bit too much on one end? On both ends. I think when the kids are kids, let them be kids. Like, let's not worry about if they have little boyfriends or little girlfriends. I see all the time on social media and some of my friends or whatever, I hear when they're talking to the kids, like, where's your little boyfriend at? Where's your girlfriend at? Like, you're imposing adult decisions on kids. They're like 7. You know what I'm saying? How many boyfriends you got? How many little girlfriends you got? And I'm like, why are we imposing any of those thoughts on? Because once you do that, then that's what turns the switch on for everything else. And talking with some people that I know that are gay, it's very confusing in the beginning anyway. And imagine an 8-year-old have to try to figure out what this is. Like, what is this? What am I feeling? How am I feeling? And you start to hear.
And why does that have a place of why does that even have a place of importance in your life at that point?
Exactly.
At that point in time, and you're I totally agree. I've been in therapy and people go to counseling, and I've heard kids at 11, 12, like, I'm bisexual. And my next question is are you sexually active?
Yeah,
because
that's it. Because when you start to say I'm straight or I'm gay, at that point some sexual something's happening with you. Because now I'm interested in the next step of what this would be. Like,
what is that? What is this? The attraction?
Right.
To me, I don't know what I like sexually if I've never had sex.
Exactly.
So how do I know I guess I always knew that I liked boys, but how do I know sexually, what's my preference?
What's the preference of either or? Right.
I mean, I understand the idea of saying, I knew I was attracted or wanted to be in a romantic relationship with one sex or another. I guess it's just difficult for me to understand the science behind a lot of things, but I've read it. And I know, the American Psychological Association, they've published a bunch of research in reference to heterosexual, lesbian, gay, the LGBT community in general. And a lot of the research goes back to genes. It does go back to, it talks, some of the research I've read is specific to hemispheres of the brain. More research says straight heterosexual women and gay men, the majority, I want to say, don't quote me 100% on this, but I want to say the majority of straight women and gay men think with the left hemisphere of their brain, and then lesbian women, straight men think with the right hemisphere. So there were all these little things. It kind of revealed it as in comparison to being left or right-handed. It was kind of certain things increase the likelihood of that being the situation. One study I read was really interesting because it identified families across generations. So if you had gay people in your family, or lesbians, LGBT of any kind, and LGBTQ of like any kind, it literally was across generations. The more you had, the more likely it was that you could or had the possibility of becoming. And it even went so far as to reveal that if you had a identical twin, your chances, if you had an identical twin that was gay or lesbian, depending on the situation, that you were 80 times more likely to be gay or lesbian yourself. So those, in the big scheme of things, there's only 1%, like 1.5% of the entire country that identifies as gay or lesbian. However, when you're in the big scheme of things, when you're talking about a specific family, 1.5% can dwindle down to like your 80% chance of being that.
And this is the thing, I don't want nobody to take this wrong. I'm not saying being gay is wrong at all. I'm not.
No, we're talking about where does that begin?
When is it appropriate to start introducing, having that availability, that access to?
I wouldn't even say appropriate, because it's one of those things, like, it is what it is, right?
No, it is.
And our kids are going to go outside. People are going to be gay. People are going to be, you have some people who are like very flamboyant and there's something different about that person. And you have some people that you would never know the difference. And it just depends. Everybody's an individual.
Right.
I think it's more important to identify like how we as parents introduce things to our children and how we implement those things within our household. Because I can only control, like, my circle of control is very small, right? My circle of control, if you and I are married, the only control that we have within our family unit is like me, you, our kid, or kids, or whatever is coming out of this circle. That's our circle of control, right? So whatever we are teaching and we are learning and we are implementing within our household is how that child begins, not to say nothing else will have an influence, but it's how that child begins to identify things. So if within our household we are teaching like self-acceptance and being non-judgmental and individuality, and those things out there are not going to be a question, because our kid is going to be looking at people like, they just are who they are. And it doesn't give their sexuality such a point of reference as opposed to just saying they're just different from me.
Right. What I'm saying is, I think for me is, when I say introduction, so my son, I teach him about all people and to accept all people and love all people. And there's not a shameful thing if you have somebody that comes to you and say, hey, this is who I am, whatever. It's not to shame that person. But what I'm getting at is the introduction. Yes, it is an appropriate thing, because it doesn't have a place in where children are just being kids. Like, it just doesn't have a place for that. I don't really agree with like any sexual type. If it's heterosexual type of like activity in a kid's thing, I don't agree with that either. Because then now you're introducing them to the whole idea of sex, period. Like, when you get to a certain age, and I'm not a prude, I know that kids start to have sex very early on. Like, has not been a recent thing, but I think it's more so now. We're very sexually energy generated generation, and it's getting worse. Like, every song is sexually generated.
Like, we're very sexually fluid.
Yeah, it's very sexual, and so it's like, I think when you start to take the idea of what a kid is, and you're flooding with more adult ideals, it takes away from their innocence. And I say that because I watch, like I said, social media, when you got these young girls, she's like 4 or 5 years old, twerking on camera, and to Megan Thee Stallion. You know what I'm saying? Like, what are we doing? You're introducing her to an ideal that adults are doing.
Yeah.
When they're talking
and they're
about,
looking up to these people.
And they're looking up to
idolizing these people.
Yeah. So you think, and then they start to get older, and then they start doing more adult decisions as they get older, and they put themselves in situations that they don't know how to get out of. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Why is any sexual anything being introduced to these kids? I think it's the parents' job. I was watching this podcast, and they were talking about they were petitioning the school, the parents was protesting and petitioning against the school, teaching their children about certain things, sex education in elementary school. Like, you're introducing them to this in kindergarten to 5th grade, and they're like, wait a minute, that's not your position to teach my kid. I don't know what you're teaching them, first of all. You can be teaching them something completely different and weird, and that's slightly pedophilia, if you really think about it. That's my job to have that conversation with my child, not you. Mm-hmm. We're not going to talk about, if I'm telling you this is what you have, this is what that is, that goes there, but don't touch that. You know what I'm saying? Like, let you have that conversation with your kid, not another adult, because one, I don't know you. I don't know what kind of mindset you're in. And why are we teaching this to the kids? Now, what happens? If you teach a kid something, they go and want to do what?
Try it. Yeah, but then you have the other side of, and see, this is like, so here's your like, other side of the fence, right? You have parents who don't teach their kids like anything. Mm-hmm. And kids are so curious naturally. Like, it's completely, I've had parents come into therapy and be like, oh, my kid was touching my sister's kid. And they think their kid is like some sexual like predator.
They're curious. And
then they tell me like, just say for instance, like -5, there's a 6. Or -5, there's is 4, like, or 5 and 5, you know, like those kinds of things are very age appropriate. Yeah. The exploration part of it, like, I'll touch yours, you touch mine, let me see yours, you can see mine. Like, those kinds of things are very age appropriate when children are young. And even when they're same age, because those things can happen in all stages of development, right? Depending on the household and how much freedom certain kids have. Like, certain kids hit different developmental areas at different times. So some of that stuff is age appropriate. And I think if you don't have those conversations and parents don't, like, I know for a fact when I was a kid, nobody talked to me about sex. I didn't know what anything was. Everything I learned was from peers. Mm-hmm. Like, definitely just from peers. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't good information. You know, right. It wasn't something that was valuable in the process of learning what sexuality was, what you should and shouldn't do.
Right. But we shouldn't manage that for the parents. Like, the school shouldn't manage that for the parents.
They shouldn't, but those kids go to school with your kids.
But if your kid falls short, if you do want to allow the school to teach your kids sexual education, you should sign them up for it. Let you make the decision and sign them up for it. But don't just impose and say, hey, we're going to start teaching them this. No. Mm-hmm. Let me do that. Like, that's my part.
Yeah, but you're talking about somebody who's rational and who like, your choice makes sense for your child. Do we rely on the fact that every parent?
But that's not, you're here to teach them the ABCs and mathematics and science. Don't teach my children about sex. I don't send them to school for that. That's not what we're here
for. I'm playing devil's advocate because you don't want them teaching your kid. Right. But what about the kid that's
not my fault?
They go to school with your kid.
Okay, but you know what? Do you mind to teach them everything then?
So,
teach them everything.
All I'm thinking is like the extreme other end, right? Like, what if you have a kid, let's just say, and this is, like I said, playing devil's advocate, worst case scenario, mm-hmm. right? What if you have a kid that was like sexually abused and nobody's ever talking about sex? And most children, there's a lot of children out there that are sexually abused that don't even know that it's inappropriate behavior until they're older. Mm-hmm. Because, like we just said, sexual related conversations and discomfort and like all those things are not always identified as something that's a traumatic experience. Because if you did something to me and somebody doesn't tell me it's a traumatic experience, the only other way I would know is if it was something that was painful, mm-hmm. right? Other than that, I can normalize something as a 4 and 5-year-old if nobody ever told me it was wrong. So I go to school with your kid now, and I think nothing of what's going on in my house, and I come in and they're not teaching any kind of sexual orientated like class or what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. So I tell you like, oh, let me show you what, you know, Uncle Tommy does to me. And you've never been educated on that at all. You're likely to go right along with it because you don't know what's appropriate and not appropriate.
Possibly. But then we need to start teaching domestic violence classes in school too. That's what I'm saying. Teach them everything because they're going to see a lot at home too. And so we're more concerned about what the parents are doing versus just teach. And some of you are not even doing a good job with that. Just teach. Get them to understand how to survive in a world with just the information they need to have to be educated. Teach. When we start to try to be parents, you can't be a parent and a teacher. You gotta be one or the other. And it's certain jobs that parents have. If they're not getting it at home, they fall short at home. I'm so sorry that kids have to do that. But teach. Do one or the other. But you can't do both. When it comes down to that, certain things just falls onto the household. And like I said, I'm not trying to sound like a prude in this situation, but I think that we're just getting so far off of things in this society where we're sticking our nose into things that we should be sticking our nose into. And now you're teaching them things, and who to say that's right? That may not even be right information. I don't know what you're teaching my kid. I don't have a copy of the syllabus. I don't have a copy of the book. I don't know what you're telling them. You could be telling them anything. So
maybe the answer is not teaching them. Maybe the answer is have a more structured setting to teach them in.
Teach the kids in high school. Don't teach them in elementary. Don't teach them in junior high school.
Why?
High school, because
they're having sex in middle school.
They're
having sex already.
I still would say no. Don't. If you're going to teach them, allow that to be a course of something that they can sign up for. Because I think some parents are uncomfortable talking to their children about sex or having the kids exposed to sex because it is a religious thing.
But
it is
they're
something that's not talked
having
about in the
sex
house
already, or other.
Well, how are you going to get people's wishes if they choose not to talk to their kid about it? Who are you to tell me that you need to talk to them about it?
Send them to private school.
That's crazy because I don't want to talk to them about it. You feel the need to step in like that? No, that's not your job.
Then don't send them to public.
If Johnny's coming home with F's and you're worried about teaching him about sex, we have a problem. Because you're not doing the major part of it. The major part is just to teach them. The sexual part and sexual orientation and all the other stuff, that goes along with the parenting. Where does the parents lie now? Then you taking all the responsibility off the parents?
No, of course not. It's like anything else. When you go to math class, you get homework, right? It goes home with you. The parent gets to see some of what you're working on, but they don't have to teach you the whole damn thing. It's the same thing as you would for anything else. This is my own belief. If you're in school, the school should give you the tools you need for life, as well as.
But they don't.
They don't. I'm not saying they do, but I'm saying it's a start. That's a starting point of implementing some sort of sexual education where a child can learn things that they wouldn't otherwise learn or they haven't been otherwise learning. Not saying that programs that we have in place right now are perfect at all by a long shot. What I am saying is that there is a need to be met where children should be educated on finances, on sexual orientation, on sexual preference when it comes to just how you're deciding that or how to navigate those communication barriers. And there's a lot of things that, I mean, I even think there should be classes on like obtaining a job and like there should be things on a lot that.
Why don't we focus on that? Why don't we focus on how to teach a child to write out a check or to invest the money or or about credit? We're not even focused on those programs, but we're more focused on the sex. Where is the logical thought process behind it? And as parents, we're like, oh, okay, tell them about sex, but leave them like in a gutter with financial education? That's crazy. Who are you failing? You're failing the child. Because now they're more worried about, do I like boys or girls? Or should I like stick my little thing there? What I should? Instead of saying, you know what, I need to understand more about the math situation, more about the science and the English, and I need to know, okay, cool, this is how I save my money. This is what credit does for me. This is how I can invest in my money.
The idea is that we can't control what they're thinking and
a lot of people don't get that education at home.
The idea is that the idea for this public sector is you're educating kids prior to getting to that point. A lot of kids hit puberty sometime between 10 and 12. If I'm not educating you prior to that point, how do you know what to do when you get to that point and you're actually feeling an attraction or some sort of sexual tension towards another human being, and you don't even understand it or begin to know how to adjust to that?
Because the thing is that I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but we're not going to school to have sex.
But they do.
But they do. But we're not. The whole structure of school wasn't that we have a room we don't go and have sex. The whole structure of school is to learn.
But
so if we're learning, actually, what we're supposed to be learning, the sex part, like I said.
But they do it. So if they are doing it, but if they are doing it.
But who are you to teach my kid? But who are you? Like, this is what I'm saying. Who appointed the school to say, it's your job? Like, how is that your job? You have a textbook for math, English, science. We have a structure of what school is. Why is it your job to teach my kid about sex? Is it your job to teach them about credit? Absolutely. Why? Because that's part of what education is. Is it your job to teach them about finances and how to, start up their own business that they wanted to? Expose them to other things that they need to be exposed to when it comes to being a productive person. Now, when it comes to the sexual thing, that's a personal thing. That's personal. Sex is personal. Why I'm letting you as a stranger that could be a pedophile too in the school is teaching my kid? That's crazy.
It's pertaining to health. It's pertaining to reproduction. It's pertaining to a lot of things.
That's crazy. I'm not signing you for that because that's not your job. It's not your job. That's not your job. Now, I will say this, and I know I'm sounding very passionate about it because I have a 10-year-old, so I'm thinking like as we get older.
I have a 6-year-old.
As you get older,
I don't enjoy the idea that somebody's going to be teaching my little girl anything about sex. But I do know for a fact that at some point she is going to have to learn it. And all I'm hopeful for is that when that time comes, that's on us as parents is to facilitate a relationship with our children that when they do get taught something, anything, and I'm not just talking about sex, but when they do get taught something or they see something or they identify something that's questionable to them, that they trust us enough as their parents to come to us and say, hey mom, I saw this today, or hey dad, I saw this today, I don't like it, made me feel weird, really didn't get it, never seen it before, can you help me kind of understand this? And they have the tools that they need to communicate those things. Because right now, I don't know what the hell's coming across her plate. I don't know what's okay and what's not okay. I don't know what kids are saying. Sometimes I get people, when you talk about practice or work or whatever, you get people and you get children that say things and I'm like, what the hell? Like, I had no idea a child this age would be dealing with this, or from when I was a kid, I was dealing with these issues at 16, 17 versus a kid that comes to me and says they're dealing with those same issues at 8 or 9. And I'm looking at mine going, she's 6. And I would never want her dealing with some of the shit I see people talking about now. But that's the reality of the world we live in. And I cannot, that's why I was talking about that circle of control. It's like, I can't control what goes on out there. I can't control what other kids are doing or what households they live in or what craziness their parents are doing or what they're seeing. And they're gonna bring that nonsense to school with my very innocent, perfect little baby girl, right? Because to me, she's perfect. She ain't never gonna have no issues. That's not realistic, but that's how I see it. And I'm, prayerful that hopefully by that time, she trusts me enough as her mother that she will come to me and say, Mom, I know this may not sound right, or I'm scared, or I'm confused. And she can hopefully have the tools that she needs, not to understand those things, but to facilitate a conversation that will initiate the process of her learning it appropriately. Even if she gets that education in school and what they're teaching her is not correct, she knows she can come to me and go, Mom, this is what I learned. Is this the right thing? And she trusts me enough to bring it home. And I think that's where we struggle, because obviously if you put your kids in public school, that's the idea, public school. You don't pay for it. So they feel like they can do whatever the hell they want. And that's the world that we live in. If you want to choose exactly what's in a curriculum, then you have to put your kid in private school.
So I do want to kind of say I disagree with that, because public school is funded by who?
It's funded by us, absolutely.
So it's because I'm not directly handing you a check every month doesn't mean that I don't have a say what you do with my kid in school. I didn't learn like technically the whole sexual education until I got in high school. The high school I went to was one of the worst high schools in this area, and B would tell you, because we went to the same high school. This is how they taught sex education in the school. They had everybody in the auditorium. It's a huge auditorium. And he started, had someone on stage, and he started going through what sex is, how to have sex, male parts, female parts, all the diseases that you can get. They show gonorrhea, syphilis, herpes, AIDS. They show all these things, and the kids are sitting there thinking this is hilarious and funny. One, nobody learned anything, and what it is that I think that school probably could have benefited from some type of sexual education if it was appropriate, because they had a high rate of teenage pregnancies. But my thing is, like, even if you're teaching them, it doesn't stop them, right? So yeah, we're trying to help a parent for something, but that still goes back to the parents. I think we handing our kids off to society too easy. Like, here, you deal with that. Like, no, sir, I'm responsible, and if they don't get it, they lack it at home, then that goes back in the household. But if the school failed the kid with sex education, you gonna go sue the school? You don't go blame the school? Like, you don't go there and raise hell because, I found my son in the room with a girl. Y'all supposed to be teaching about sex education. No, we told him to put a rubber on. Did he have a rubber with him? No. Okay, well, I told him the things that he needed to know, and he chose not to do it. Listen, let's face it, kids are going to be kids. They're going to do what they want to do. It really breaks down to what the parents choose or don't choose to do with their kids. Anytime I meet with my son's teacher, they say, I'm so glad that you're so involved in your child's life. Because a lot of parents are not involved the way you are. I'm like over involved because I do want to know what he's learning. And so when it comes down to sex, he's 10, we started talking about it already. He said, Dad, I'm really not into that right now. We'll talk about it later. And we'll get into whatever you want to get into when he wants to get into it. But when you start talking about it before they're ready, like, how do you know they're ready to talk about that? I don't know if I want to talk about this right now. But I'm forced to sit in the classroom with you and talk about it. You could be ashamed of it. You're right. It could be a young girl in the class next to that young boy. That young girl has been raped every night by her dad, and she's forced to sit through that with you. How's that fair? That's what I say. You can't impose that on people without really understanding what that could cause. And I said that we have, as parents, we have the duty to protect our children. We have the duty to educate our children on certain things. I'm not going to sit at home all day unless I decide to homeschool and teach them all the math and science and all those other curriculums and then send them to you to teach them about sex education. So it's the same situation. I'm going to teach about sex and sex education, and I'm going to send it to you to do that other work. And so I feel you. I think that overall, society-wise, we're in a weird space where sex is just so open. Kids are really exposed, that's where I started out with, they're exposed to a lot. And then some of the things can be very confusing for them. We're like, I don't even know why I even feel this way. You gotta think, you have a kid that's a preteen going through puberty, and they're like, trying to figure out, I'm still getting peach fuzz down there. Like,
well, and that goes back to educating kids too. Like, so I've had where, like, I have a book for my daughter, and I've probably had that book now 2 years. It's called Who Has What and Why.
I like it.
And it's a really cute book when it comes to like pictures and things like that. But the beginning of the book is, it starts off with that like, oh, our boys and girls, men and women, animals that are boys and girls, are they all alike? And then, the character basically, like, as you go on, it's like, they are mostly alike. Like, it goes through all your body parts. All men and women have 10 fingers, 10 toes, 10, like, we all have a belly button, a nose, 2 eyes, those kind of things. And then it goes into private parts. And it talks about reproductive organs and, like a boy has a penis and a girl has a vagina and a girl has 3 holes and a boy has 2. So it goes into all of that, but it's written in the context of like to adapt to a small child. And not that a small child is always, but it's written for a child like 4 or 5 years old. And it talks about developing hair, and it's very simplistic in the way it's written, but I think the good part of that book is like, it gives a child an opportunity to learn those things over the course of time. You know, if I start you at 4 and I start identifying, like, these are your body parts, these are the body parts of a girl, these are the body parts of a boy, those conversations that I will say me, because as a child, those were conversations that we didn't have in my house. When I became a preteen and a teenager, and sex was something that was very outwardly expressed, and kids were talking about sex, kids were having sex, I was not in the position emotionally, or I was not like developed in communication enough with my parents where I was comfortable having a conversation about the things going on in my world with my parents to ask questions. And I believe that by talking about it now, it's something that will become normalized in a way that my daughter won't feel so uncomfortable saying, this is what I heard, Mom, what about this? Or this is what somebody did, Mom, what about this? It's more of a regular conversation, like, hey Mom, I heard blah, 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 blah. And you've already talked about body parts, and maybe as they get older, you talk about what's private, what's not. This is, you know, giving them boundaries and saying, like, you know, because all kids, you know, you have that kids say the darndest thing. So the funny part of it is like, oh, you know, your kids go into a classroom and they go, I watched my daddy take a poop this morning. And you're like, oh, I can't believe you. You know, like, but that's a boundary. It's like, it's not appropriate to have that discussion with people outside of your home. But that's part of them learning what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And it goes along with private parts or things that you do in private, or what's appropriate for a man and a woman who are in a romantic relationship versus a man and a woman who are just friends.
Right.
And identifying those relationships for a child and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And if that consistently happened and people learn to communicate those things without making them so crazy, and kids looking at something like, oh, I'm not supposed to talk about that.
Right.
Then it wouldn't be something that would even get to a point where you would have an issue with it the way you have, because at that point, if I'm teaching it to them at 10 in school, it would be something that has occurred over time, because it probably wouldn't even be a class that has to be had because it's normalized to be talked about, because the need for those classes didn't even come about until teen pregnancy became such a big issue, until kids getting STDs, contracting HIV, syphilis, things that were STDs and teenage pregnancy that were interrupting kids becoming educated, because they were being put out of schools or getting pulled out of school because it was something that was becoming normalized. And if they were educated prior to all of that stuff happening, it would be an ongoing conversation.
Yeah. And it goes to, this is going to sound crazy, I add a couple parts of it, but we're teaching kids, young adults, that sex is bad in some sort. And I think that's bad. Like, we shouldn't teach them sex is bad. Sex is a huge decision. It's a huge responsibility. And you're hearing that teen pregnancy portion is the lack of home, right?
Well, absolutely, because where does a 12-year-old have the room to be having sex regularly?
It's lack of home training. It has very little to do with anything else. But then you also have people that are in really good homes, have really great parents, have a really good structure, and still end up pregnant. It's legitimately their choice to do so. And so we feel like what America does, become the big brother, want to step in and tell you what you should be doing and how you should raise your kids and how you shouldn't be doing this and that. Like, no, you know what? You failed as a parent. If your child ended up pregnant at age 12, you didn't properly explain to your child, hey, if you decide to have these urges to do these things, you have to protect yourself. That was a failure in the home. You have to deal with the consequences.
So what's the answer though?
So, great question. I think that the parents should have an option. if they wanted to go to the school and say, I don't know the appropriate way to have a conversation with my child, I want to sign them.
How many parents would do that?
But
Realistically.
you got, this is the thing, you still got, stop babying them.
And I'm only
We can't keep babying
I'm
these
only
adults. It's your responsibility. If
yes,
you fail to show up for work, you get fired. It's a consequence. If you don't take responsibility for your child, it's your child. You send your child to school. If your child doesn't show up to school, guess what happens? There's a consequence. Take some responsibility for your damn kids.
But here's your other
Signed up.
Here's
sign
your
kids
other
up.
piece, right? That is you because you're passionate about that because you're thinking about your son and how this impacts him personally, right? But the other side of that is when you're talking about kids that aren't getting that education, parents that are too prideful to ask for help and won't ask somebody else to do it, and kids that are not being sexually educated appropriately or are too afraid to come forward and say, hey mom, I need some condoms because mom's gonna beat your ass for admitting to being sexually active or whatever. Guess what happens? That kid ends up having a baby. They cannot afford to have that baby. That person goes on welfare or that kid ends up in the system. And guess who's paying for him anyway? Me and you. So at the end of the day, it's like one extreme or the other. You either allow this stupid, education system to educate them about some shit you never want your kids to hear about, or you have a bunch of kids walking around out there that don't know anything,
right,
and they're having all kinds of weird stuff happen, and they're either dying, they're getting sick, they're getting other people sick, they're having kids, and we end up paying for that anyway. Or half of our taxes are going to Planned Parenthood.
Right.
Planned Parenthood has a multi-million-dollar budget. Why? Because people are paying them for the services that we're trying to educate our children about that they shouldn't be doing anyway. Like,
It's a whole nother conversation.
but what I'm saying is that in the big scheme of things, there's one side to this evil, one side to this evil. Like, there's no happy medium because obviously every parent is not going to be perfect. Obviously, every parent can't educate because guess what? Every parent is not educated in that department, or every parent doesn't know how to even have that conversation. The conversation I had when I was a kid, and it wasn't necessarily bad, is that I was raised Catholic, right? So you know what my education was? Don't have sex or you're going to hell. You're Catholic. You don't have sex before you get married. And if I only had sex with my husband, the likelihood that I would end up with an STD or a kid out of wedlock is very low, right? Because you ain't having sex. So it was something that you didn't have a conversation about it, ever. So they're like, then you have families that talk about sex like it's, like like your homeboy, like, hey Tad, I smashed this today, and it's like a big funny thing.
Yeah, but all right. So question: should parents, and this is the reason why I'm going this direction, should parents impose religion on their kids, like the religion that they believe in?
That's another show.
No. It actually ties into this. Should they impose that onto the kids?
I mean, I don't think there's really an option.
You don't have an option.
There's not an option because if I practice a specific religion, then I mean, I don't have the option of whether if I go to church every Sunday, you don't have a choice. You have to come with me.
It's the responsibility there. There's a responsibility that parents take on. You can impose all these other ideas, like impose on, like say, hey, you're going to be Christian, you're going to be Muslim, you're going to be this, you're going to be that.
That's not even a topic of conversation because that's just what it is.
This is all we've done. So now, why is it in the same situation? Like in this family, we're all straight. It's the same concept. It's an ideal that the family inherits, right? So if you're teaching your kid to be open to life and experiences, then that's what it is. If you're teaching them that this is where it is, it's your responsibility. When you leave society, if you leave society to teach your kids, to educate your kids, to show your kids things, you get what you get. And when we say here, I don't want to talk about it, it's uncomfortable, or I don't want to care what you do with them when they're at school, as long as they don't come home till 3 o'clock. Like, really? Like, we have no concept of what's really going on. My son's teachers hate me because I'm on that ass about everything. I don't understand why this is like that. Can you explain it to me? And so some parents don't do that. There's a lot, they really don't. They tell me, they just don't do that. We don't have that. And majority of these kids in this class, they fall short. And me, sending him to school with them. Now, I'm supposed to be afraid that they've fallen short at home with their parents and they don't care about their education? No, I'm still going to continue being a parent and do my part. I can't entrust only the school to teach them that. And to your point, he says they're not getting it at home, so they only getting it at school. They're only getting it there. So now that could be even more dangerous. Because the only thing you know is that I know that I have a penis or I have a vagina. I know that there could be a possibility I get pregnant. I know that if I don't want to get pregnant, I can wear a condom. I'm just going to do that. You know what I'm saying? Versus saying like, son, sit them down. This is a huge responsibility. If you're able to do this, you should be able to do that. And this is the section is geared for. You're going to have the urges. This is what's going to, how your body's going to change. Same thing with your little girls. And don't be ashamed of that. I don't want you to feel ashamed, because what shame does is cause people to be secretive and sneak around and do things that they don't want to tell their parents to be open about.
But that goes into so many other things. Like, it's easy to say like have this but everything within a household goes into something else, right? Because I mean, how many parents have you heard say like, I don't talk to my son or my daughter about finances? I don't talk to my son or my daughter about how much money I make, or if I end up short, or if we're struggling. I don't talk to them about that. But if I'm talking to you about sex, and I'm talking to you about STDs, and I'm talking to you about the possibility of parenting a child, then I have to talk to you about finances and what financial responsibility is, and how that leads into what you can or can't provide for another human being. So I have to be realistic across the board. And if I'm the parent that doesn't like talking about certain things, or I feel it's inappropriate to talk about certain things with my kid, I can't put some things in and take some things out. You can't pick and choose where you want to parent and where you don't. So if I decide like, yes, I'm going to educate my child about all of these things, or having relationships, or sexual orientation, or how you navigate those things throughout your life, I also have to talk about the realistic possibility that you might have to financially provide and what that looks like, which means the only example I can give them is me. And these are the things I've had to deal with. And these are the things that come along with being a part of a family and providing for another human being, feeding them, clothing them, diapers, whatever it is, formula, hospital bills, all of those things that we deal with every day, those things will have to come into that conversation as well.
Absolutely.
And a lot of parents don't want to do that.
Absolutely. So once again, you're not going to save them all. What I mean by that, like, you can't hold every person the same. But what if I'm getting all that at the house? And I still got to sit in class with you about it too? Because you fell short at home, I gotta sit through this. I don't want to. There's some people that are ashamed and nervous about it. It goes right back to what I said. It is
what is there, a placement test?
If the schools that you're teaching us in, if your test scores are low and you're more concerned about sex education, we have failed completely.
I'm just asking. Do you give them like a test?
No,
and say,
we
like,
don't.
Hey, this person
This is open. I know in schools they have like where you can sign up for different things or whatever, and I think it should be where if a kid's interested in
so it's an elective.
It's a choice. You can choose to say, hey, I want to know more about that. You can sign up for it, get your parents' permission to say yes, it's fine, and then you go for it. Because if you're curious, you're going to do it. It shouldn't be forced on me. If that's the case, let's bring religion back in school and force that on them. Because that's your perspective. So I can teach about sex education, and you can teach it too, but it can come differently in different perspectives. I can have a whole different idea about sex than you do. I can be more open about sex and the idea what sex should be about. And when I'm teaching it, it's completely different. You can be more rigid about yours and making people feel ashamed about sex. So that's what I said. Hey, if you want to learn, you have to give people the autonomy to make the decisions for themselves. When you take that out their hands, you're handicapping them every step of the way. And parents are going to be more like this than more involved. You say, well, I'll do it for you. Don't worry about it. Well, you got it? Cool. I ain't got to talk about when they get home with this. It's cool. She knows. I don't know why she ended up pregnant. She knows she went to that class in school. No, man. It continues at the house. So, yes, I think that it goes back to the parents, back to the student. If they want to know, just like anything that you want to know. If you want to know, you need to go find out. You need to ask. Not be felt like you have to do this. Some people don't want to do that. And so if they don't want to, you should force them to sit in that class. Now, learning math, That's not an option. Like, you have to learn that. That's part of like the curriculum of school. Always have been. So, like I said, if you're
Well,
failing,
just because it always has been, does that necessarily mean it's necessary?
absolutely. If
Why
your
do
kid,
I have to go to biology?
I don't know, unless you want to be doing something in biology, you can. But
But it's
I think open that portion because it all ties into it. Science ties into math. Math ties into science. English, all that. So
Yeah, but me knowing about fish in the ocean doesn't tie into my algebra.
yes, it does. All science and math ties into each other.
That's what they say.
It does.
I don't see it. And that's what I'm saying. It's like all subject to perspective. And when you look at one situation, it's easy to say like, yes, I feel this way about this one situation. I feel very strongly about this, but don't feel as strongly about this. And it all ties in together. Like we all have to live life. We all have to live in the same communities. Our kids all touch each other and live together in the same community and go to school together. So if one kid is uneducated and they're walking around spreading whatever they got, and they can make anything sound like all you gotta do is be confident about something and it makes sense. And next thing you know, you have a bunch of kids who believe that nonsense because so-and-so said it like it was the most awesome thing ever, and they believe it.
Is sex education on the SATs? Is sex education on the SATs?
No.
My point. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
SATs is also a standard. We could go into that and SOLs, SATs, those are all standardized testing that were made for white males predominantly.
I get that part, but I'm saying what we're basing off of and what we're testing on, what is
your basis for your opinion then?
What we need to know, our kids to know when they go to school, these are what they're testing them on. They're not testing on if you know what sex is.
They're not testing on economics either, and that was a class.
So it no longer is.
There's music classes. Everybody doesn't have to take music or.
It's an elective. You can elect to take it. That's what I said.
Schools, it is not in all.
If you want to.
Did your kid not come home with a recorder? Yes, he did.
He did. That's part of his music class. In elementary is the music class.
That's a standardized class that's created as a curriculum. My kid's not going to be Mozart. So my kid don't have to learn music.
You don't know.
You don't know, but you don't know what kid is running around with sex education and what kid isn't.
But that has nothing to do with that part.
That has to do with life.
Okay. Well, I guess I can see your point. I don't agree with it, but I see what you're coming from.
Thanks for watching.
But no, we're not finished yet. No, we're not. I got one more thing statement to make, and I think I just lost it because you said that part.
Because I cut him.
You didn't cut me. I just think that, I feel like if you really want to cut out that, cool, cut it out. But my thing is, if it's not what you're testing me on, what I need to know to move forward, why are we focusing on that? To my point, we're more focused on sex education in schools where it's low test scores, and you're more worried about if this kid's getting pregnant or not. That's crazy to me.
Because that's not the big picture.
That's not the big picture.
That's not the big picture. The big picture for them is, first of all, that curriculum has nothing to do with test scores. That curriculum has to do with passing those SOLs because funding depends on how well those kids are doing. And the only thing they give a damn about is SOL testing and standardized testing because they can say like this school in this neighborhood is smarter than these kids in this neighborhood. But if you ain't got no kids to educate because they're all pregnant or sick, then you don't have to worry about numbers because half of them are dropping out, and then they're going to be like, this school.
Issue. It's a deeper
But that's the idea of why they're educated.
Because I don't care if you tell them or not, they're still going to do what they're going to do. And
don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not saying one way is wrong and one way is right. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that I understand the premise of why it was developed and its use, the idea of what it's used for. What I don't totally agree with is always like curriculum or how it's being presented, or the fact that your PE teacher is the same one giving you sexual education. I don't always agree with that because I don't think that those people are always qualified to be the one giving that information. However, I do think the information is pertinent to a child's growth and development. And you can't guarantee that they're getting that education at home, or they have communication within the home that's open enough and honest enough to be communicating what their concerns are and what their questions are.
Right. You know, a bigger epidemic and problem we have outside of pregnancy in school is becoming more prominent now that they don't talk about social sensitivity and awareness. You have these same young black men we talking about, or whomever, young people that are out here getting in trouble. So if they're not pregnant, they're locked up. And so why aren't we teaching about that? Why aren't we having conversations and courses about that? That's what I'm saying. If you're going to do one, let's find the ones that really hit home. The other things we have to be able to talk about at home. Even social sensitivity, that goes into the house. I have to have a conversation with my son. You're a young black male. When you're out here, you have to conduct yourself a certain way. And so it's the same thing. When you're out here, you're dealing with these young ladies, you have to conduct yourself a certain way. If they're not learning it at home, guess what happens? They go out there, same people that go to school with my kid, that will potentially go to school with yours, that are sitting out here doing the same thing. So my thing is like, we have to put it back in the home. Educate the community, educate the home. And no, some parents should even be parents, but we can't talk about them. That's like a drop in the bucket. There's a whole school full of people. Some have good upbringing, some don't. We send our kids to school. We send them to school. They don't just come and pick them out the house. We send them out there. So it starts in the house first. Thank you guys for watching. This can go on forever, but it was a good conversation. I respect your point of view. I think you have some really great points. It's all about what you want, what's important to you.
So thank you for watching.
Thank you for watching. Make sure you go like and subscribe. Down below, click on the little bell so you get notifications. Also, go ahead and follow us on social media, on Facebook at Morning Coffee, and on Instagram at Morning Coffee. And you can follow me on Instagram right down here, P. Hakeem, and
Unmatched, Unapologetic, or Amanda Love on Facebook. So
there you go. And until next time.